in sight. And you there, little second star, unnoticed in the dark blue corner, what is my wish on you? Over the years, several friends have had their kitchens remodeled. A big deal at the time, yet they never mention it now. The more I look at you, the more I see their marble countertops lying sleek and mentionless and forlorn. I wish you, little marble, would be my countertop, and I would never stop talking about you. I'm not in any kind of trance as I wish this. I've not stepped out of time, nor am I one with it. All that stuff was with the first star. But with you, little blue marble second star, I am at home, completely and safely at home. You can chop on me, I can chop on you. Why, it is as if I am a girl again, when my mother had a bowl expressly shaped to hold bananas, and simply by putting grapes in it, I could get in trouble. I'm going to read some prose now. I don't really draw a distinction between any of it. And I know Mr. Creeley wrote prose as well, wonderful prose. So, this is called Observations on the Ground. The planet seen from extremely close up is called the ground. The ground can be made loose by the human hand or by using a small tool held in the human hand, such as a spade, or an even larger tool, such as a shovel, or a variety of machines commonly called heavy equipment. We bury our dead in the ground. Roughly half the dead are buried in boxes and half the dead are buried without boxes. A burying box is an emblem of respect for the dead. We are the only species to so envelop our dead. An earlier, more minimal way to envelop the dead was to wrap them in cloth. Besides burying the dead in the ground, we bury our garbage, also called trash. Man-made mountains of garbage are pushed together using heavy equipment and then pushed down into the ground. The site of this burial is called a landfill. The site of the dead buried in boxes is called a cemetery. In both cases, the ground is being filled. A dead body in a box can be lowered into the ground using heavy equipment, but we do not consider it trash. When the dead are not in boxes and there is a man-made mountain of them, we use heavy equipment to bury them together, like trash. It is estimated that everywhere we walk, we are walking on a piece of trash and the hard, insoluble remains of the dead. Whatever the case, the dead and the garbage are together in the ground where we cannot see them, for we do not relish the sight or smell of them. If we did not go about our burying, we would be in danger of being overcome. Also buried in the ground are seeds, which we want to see when they emerge from the ground in their later form, that is, as plants. Plants rising from the ground are essential to life. To bury a seed is to plant it. When a seed is planted and not seen again, those who buried it are made sad. The anticipated plant of the wished-upon seed has not materialized. It is dead and remains buried. Heavy equipment is used to plant large expanses of ground with seed. When a whole field of shivering grain rises from the earth, there is a growing sense of happiness among those who buried it. Happiness is also present when a tree emerges, or a tree that will bear fruit, or leafy green edible plants that were formerly planted. When flowers arise from the ground, colorful and shapely in an astonishing variety of ways, the living are made especially happy. Not only are flowers admired for their outward beauty of form, their scents are capable of overcoming us and therefore prized. Nothing, it seems, makes the living as happy as a flower. Flowers are among the most anticipated things on earth. For this reason, we separate the flower from the ground and present it to another to hold or to look at. After a while, the flower which has been separated from the ground dies, and we throw it in the trash. Flowers are often planted where the dead are buried in boxes, but these flowers are never cut. That would be horrible. Whoever did such a thing would be considered a thief. Those flowers belong to the dead. Little golf pencil. I had to write something for that title, basically. I mean, yeah, the title came first, which is not usually the case, but little golf pencil. At headquarters, they asked me for something dry and understated. Mary, they said, it's called a statement. They took me out back to a courtyard where they always ate lunch and showed me a little tree that was, sadly, dying. Something with 4 legs had eaten it rather badly. Don't over-emote, they said. I promised I wouldn't, but I was thinking to myself that the something with 4 legs had certainly over-emoted, and that the tree in response was over-emoting now, being in the strange little position of dying. All the cops were sitting around eating sandwich halves and offered me one. This one's delicious, said a lieutenant. My wife made it. Seeing as it was peanut butter and jelly, I thought he was over-emoting, but I didn't say anything. I just sat looking at the tree and eating my sandwich half. When I was ready, I asked for a pencil, and they gave me one of those little golf pencils. I didn't say anything about that either. I just wrote my statement and handed it over. It was a description of the tree which they intended to give to their captain as a Christmas present. I mean, my description. Because the captain, well, he loved that tree and he loved my writing, and every one of the cops hoped to be promoted in the captain's heart and, who knows, maybe get a raise. Still, after all that sitting around in the courtyard eating sandwich halves, I had a nice feeling of sharing. So when they asked me if I had anything else to say, I told them that in the beginning you understand the world but not yourself, and when you finally understand yourself, you no longer understand the world. They seem satisfied with that. Cops, they're all so young. The gift. The day the living room flooded, I had not left the apartment in 5 days. Everything was spotlessly clean. I had no work to do except writing my thoughts in a journal, the thought of which filled me with terror and boredom. That fateful and final morning, I was in bed reading, unable to concentrate because of what I had done the day before. The day before, I had ordered by telephone a large gift box of glacé apricots from Australia. The catalog, South Sea Gifts, showed the fruit in a handsome wooden crate lined with gold foil. They cost $86.20, and I had them sent to myself with a gift card that said, "From Mary to Mary." I was uneasy because I now had no money to buy groceries with, and it would be some time before the apricots arrived, even though I had had them sent express, which had cost more. I had looked forward to them arriving, but at the same time they would, when they arrived, only remind me of my stupidity and terrible guilt. My guilt was tremendous, to have used the last of my money sending myself a gift of glacé apricots. And the gold foil, that had cost more too. The cheaper home boxes had more apricots in them, but were without gold foil. The gold foil looked so nice shining beside the golden apricots. Of course, I had been looking at a photograph, and I worried that the picture was somehow touched up, because I once met a food stylist whose job it was to make photographs of food look better than the food itself. She used glycerin and starch and hairspray to make things luscious and shining, crisp, fresh, mouth-watering in a tantalizing way. I didn't want to open the box and be disappointed. I also thought of ordering a circle of white cotton mosquito netting, but came to my senses. At least I could eat the apricots. What would I do with mosquito netting? I just like the way it looks. You can drape it over anything, and the draped thing becomes soft and mysterious. I read an article once about a woman who was an intensely intellectual Buddhist, and she wanted to make her house as empty and white as possible, but she owned thousands of books which dragged the energy of the space down, so she simply made vertical pillars of her books and draped the netting over them and got the effect she was after, the effect of owning nothing, wanting nothing, living in a windswept environment of peace. All my extravagant mail ordering, it had me feeling uneasy. I felt vapid and shallow and guilty. I love my books, and just the sight of them strewn around on low-lying tables and lined up on windowsills and stacked on the floor, along with catalogs and unopened bills, had always made me feel happy in a teeming, chaotic way, and gave me the feeling my life was full and interesting, that I was a serious and charming person. I also worried about the people who answered the phone for the catalog companies. Did they have enough to eat? Did they ever steal a glacé apricot or two? I knew they had work. They had to answer phone calls. They had to calm the caller down and answer all her questions. They had to explain the difference between a gift box and a home box. I could see them in a cavernous room, sitting in makeshift booths with earphones on. For some reason, I draped them all with mosquito netting. I mean, each one individually wore a cocoon of soft white gauze. It muffled their voices while they spoke to the customer. She had to ask them to repeat what they just said. So an endless loop of repetition began to bubble up from the cocoons. That's how I pictured it. It was then that I heard the water in the living room, bubbling up from some mysterious source. I got out of bed to investigate, and as soon as I entered the hall, I saw a pool of brown water advancing towards my feet. I had forgotten to put my slippers on. I was standing in my bare feet, and the brown water came on over my ankles. I waded forward toward the living room. The sofa was covered with mud and pieces of debris, sticks and clumps of leaves, the black gunk that closes off a rain gutter. There was a high water mark on the television screen, a wavy white salt horizon that crossed the black glass. My books, too, were covered with wavy lines of loose, disintegrating matter, detritus, I believe it is called. Some piglets were scavenging the place, eating the stuffing out of a chair in a corner, a chair I always read in. Why did I decide to read in bed that morning? I don't know. It was highly unusual. Everything was waterlogged. The legs of the table looked soft, like they were made of oatmeal, and a mass riot of spiders swarmed on top of my table, the way I've seen ants swarm under my welcome mat outside. The flood had obviously subsided. It must have happened during the night when I was sleeping. I thought for a moment that there was a bloated corpse on the floor, that it was just a sack of rotten potatoes that had floated out from under the sink and was stranded in the stagnant water, a gelatinous mass puffed up and green. I'm ashamed to say my first thought was that I could not possibly clean up this mess by myself. I needed help. And what about those piglets in the corner devouring my chair? Where did they come from? The place stank. It smelled worse than a sewer. It smelled like a petri dish of primordial ooze, and whoever I called for help would have to cordon off more than my living room. The entire building and the block it sat upon would have to be cordoned off too. And in this way, another day of potential reverie had been broken into, utterly destroyed by my desire for an apricot. A single indiscretion for which my habitat had become a village of sticks on the banks of a rising river, where trade winds blew and the rains came and mosquitoes bred. And where mosquitoes breed, one will be needing some netting. Go back to poetry here. I want to read another poem by Mr. Creeley. I love this poem. It's called Bresson's Movies. He's a French film director, but it's explained in the poem, so there's no reason for me to say anything. A movie of Robert Bresson's showed a yacht at evening on the Seine, all its lights on, watched by two young, seemingly poor people on a bridge adjacent. The classic boy and girl of the story, anyone one cares to tell. So years pass, of course, but I identified with the young, embittered Frenchman, knew his almost complacent anguish and the distance he felt from his girl. Yet another film of Bresson's has the aging Lancelot with his awkward armor standing in a wood of small trees, dazed, bleeding. Both he and his horse are trying to get back to the castle, itself of no great size. It moved me that life was, after all, like that. You are in love. You stand in the woods with a horse, bleeding. The story is true. Miguette de Bois. I was an unopened action figure hidden inside an egg, inside an ovary. The next thing I knew, I was on the couch reading Madame Bovary. And when I finished, I could not move. I took to bed with Anna Karenina and a great zoom of sadness on top of me. The paper came from trees. I pressed flowers between the pages and had a forest where I could talk and not be overheard. And still, I could not walk. I live about 20 minutes from the birthplace of Grandma Moses, the extraordinary American 20th century painter, whose birth name is Anna Moses. It's called Grandma Moses. Real snow glitters, so add glitter to the paint when painting snow. When the barn burns, study a cat's tongue for the shape of the flames. Flames lick the air, there is no end to their convulsive tenderness. Then coat them in red and orange feathers. Animosis is the state of being oneself. In this state, there is a village where children do nothing but play. And there is hay, piles and piles of hay. You can stay. You can bury yourself in the hay. Hooray, hooray, it's Animosis Day. Eating beets with a pitchfork is okay. Tuna and a play. Tonight we are having tuna and a play. Earlier I picked grasses with Jay. Bluegrass, pink grass, silver grass, we each carried a bouquet. I asked Jay if she was glad to be human. Jay, are you glad to be a human? But she couldn't say. She walked through the grasses for what seemed like a day. I thought I saw her face turn gray, but it was no more than a moment in a very nice day. And tonight we are having tuna and a play. Midnight Express. I smoked in profound silence, wondering what would come next. But nothing came next. I am not what is called a woman of imagination, but I am not without a certain psychological insight, and I think I might have been dwelling in the realm of gnomes engaged in hoisting false signals and misplacing switches for the Midnight Express. And now I feel a pause. And now I jump over it with sudden indescribable tenderness, as if actually bending over a cradle. And now I feel I'm on my way. Now I am in my machine, the road rolling beneath me, behind me, in front of me, and it is no imagination that I picture you in your machine, or reading, or washing your clothes. Though it is perhaps this 1 hour you have chosen to make a list of all the acts you are ashamed of, or the ones that came to nothing through no fault of your own, so that you sit quietly and in great silence like a gnome on a stump, one of the older ones, smoking a pipe filled with bewilderment and regret.